So indeed, welcome to you all. I would like a special welcome to our speakers. Beatrice, could you pick up one of the slide? No. So very much welcome to these WEConversations, which we call to regulate or not to regulate, what's next for digital labor platforms. I'm very pleased and delighted to welcome to this conversation three distinguished experts and guests, which are Eva Sosowska, who has been the spokesperson for platform work during the ILC, Aurélien Pazzana, who is the expert from board, and Mohamed El Dawi, who is our member from Targeted HR Manpower Group Egypt, also have been present at the ILC. We want to discuss what's happening on platform work, both European and globally, what happened at the ILC, and we have three really experts for the conversations here today. But before we go there, I would like to ask each and every one of you to go to Slido and to give us a first insight on your views on platform work. And here the most important question we want to hear from you is about what is the most important regulatory challenge when it comes to platform work. And you have the Slido code here, you have the QR code here, so please enter the code, scan the code, and then Beatrice will show the results. I will stop sharing. It hits too broadly. Interesting. Compliance with labor law, level playing field. Yeah, these are very well-known ideas and concepts. GDPR, data protection. One size doesn't fit all. Yes, indeed. And people are still typing. Description of collaborations. I think this is something we're going to hear again in our conversations, in our talks. And well, I think people have stopped typing, so let's stop the slide and let's get to the content. Eva, you have been leading the employers delegation at the ILC, and we are very happy that you are with us today. And my question to you would be on digital labor platforms. What have been the main demands of the employers community, and how do you assess the main outcomes of this ILC, knowing it's only the first year of discussions, and we're going to have another year of tough discussions next year? So Eva, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for the invitation to speak to the entire WEC team. I'm very pleased to join you all today to discuss this important topic on the platform economy. Before I answer your question, Michael, maybe just to take a step back and make sure that everyone is on the same page about what has just transpired. So, as you mentioned, Michael, we are in the middle of a 2-year standard setting process at the International Labor Organization, the ILO. This standard setting process could have technically resulted in either a binding or a non-binding standard. It has now been agreed upon to be a binding standard complemented by a non-binding recommendation. So what's really at stake here is preserving the independent contractor status around the world and also preserving some labor market flexibility. We saw just on the Slido screen someone responded the need to be mindful of national contexts, and that's exactly what's at stake with this ILO standard on platform work. Um, Going into the negotiations which just took place over the last 2 weeks in Geneva, our main demands as the employer community or the business community was first and foremost to maintain existing labor relations, respecting that labor relations work differently in different countries, and the rightful distinction between employees and those who are self-employed are there for a reason. And so that has really been the top priority during these negotiations. Secondly, from obviously an employer perspective, it's also important for us to optimize the benefits of the platform economy and leverage all the opportunities that it presents. Obviously, platform work is not the right fit for every worker on the planet, but it's good for workers to have the choice to do platform work if they so wish. And so, one of our key this sort of second key highlight for the employer group is really making sure that we continue to map opportunities and not vilify the platform economy at large. So that has been very important for us. And then the third aspect going into this negotiation was also just making sure that we preserve um, the business freedom to use technologies. This is really the first time in ILO history that we are sort of inching towards tech governance and tech regulation in the context of the world of work. And so, that of course has a specific meaning in the platform economy, but that is, it could create a slippery slope for labor regulations at large. So it's really important that if we are trickling into this tech governance, that we do so in a way that preserves companies' freedom to utilize the tech tools that make sense in their particular business model. So those were the wishes that we had going into the negotiations. It was a very intense 2 week negotiations, highly sensitive, highly controversial, but there were really good outcomes. Some wins, some losses, as it always is in ILO negotiations. But allow me maybe to highlight five or so of the key takeaways. So, one of the things that's important for all of you to know is that what was agreed upon during this negotiation is we got the basics down. So, the definitions and scope were agreed upon during this year's ILC. So, we sort of have the foundation together in terms of what it is that we're talking about. And that includes location-based and online-based platforms, very much in line with how the ILO has talked about this topic in the last couple of years. A second important outcome that's worth noting is that there was consensus to delete something called a simplified amendment procedure. Now, with the risk of getting a little too nerdy and a little bit too into the weeds here, I am flagging this because this simplified amendment procedure would essentially mean a rewriting of the final labor standard every 2 or 3 years. Now, that would obviously pose a high level of legal uncertainty and a really dangerous precedent for how we write labor laws around the world. But thankfully, that was deleted from the final text, or from the text that we agreed upon for this year. And that is an important takeaway, because that would have really created a lot of headaches at the national level for many of us. Um, a third outcome that I think is really important to note is that, beyond the scope, the definition, and the simplified amendment procedure, we only really got through one substantive paragraph, and that was on the usage of automated systems, including those based on algorithms. And that provision basically says that companies need to inform workers and unions on the use of automated systems and the impact that it has on working conditions. So that is quite a big step. We haven't seen anything like this before in an ILO standard. And of course, the use of technology is very much the center of the platform economy because it is digital by nature. But of course, it also sets a precedent for how tech issues may be tackled for the broader economy and future
Mm.
standards. So that is an important development that companies should be aware of. And that information sharing that is required in that provision pertains to sharing the information with the workers and the unions, but before the engagement or before the hiring. So that's also an important element that we're again trickling into this sort of tech governance side of the ILO. A fourth outcome that's also worth noting is that, in recent years, let's say from the last 2 decades, during a 2 year standard setting process, it's been pretty normal to get through between 60 and 100% of all the provisions. Whereas what happened during this negotiation is we merely got through 15% of the text. So it just indicates to all of us how complex this topic is, and sort of, how there are very differing perspectives. The business community sees this very differently than the workers. And so, it was great that there was consensus on many items, on definitions and on scope, but in reality, we only touched a small portion of the instrument as a whole. And so that is sort of, a key flag is really that this is a complex topic and it's not going to be easy to reach a final instrument next year. And then the last important outcome that I think is worth noting for this group is that there was one other thing that there was broad consensus on, which was the fact that we need a principle-based convention. So there is an appetite among member states to ensure that the instrument doesn't end up being too detailed, but really stay at a principle-based level. So that is good news, and I think that will certainly make it easier for implementation at the country level one day. But we will see how that shakes out and how that actually is put into words in this draft standard. So those are some of the outcomes. It's still just the first year, but at least we have the basics right, and hopefully we are on track with preserving existing labor relations as we set out to do.
Thank you much, Eva. I have one question to you, which is in my mind, since I'm back from Geneva last Friday. In these 2 weeks, there was a constant discussion on a global standard versus getting inspiration or being influenced by European laws. Because we, of course, know there's an EU directive on platform work, which was the first multinational standard on platform work, even before the ILO standards have been discussed. And I have seen, as I've been following platform work intensely at European level, that there are some parallels and some kind of influence from the EU directive to the ILO standard. How do you see this interrelation between the European discussions, global discussion, and how can we avoid this discussion become too Eurocentric?
Thanks for that question, Michael. It's a really good one. You are absolutely spot on that when you read the draft instrument produced by the ILO, it's very evident that a big chunk of the inspiration comes from the European Platform Work Directive. And of course, what is great about the European Platform Work Directive is that it was developed by consensus in the European context, right? So in order for the ILO standard to sort of reach the same level of ownership and ultimate, hopefully, success, it's important that we also reach consensus among the tripartite constituents at the global level. And that really includes hearing from different regions and different subregions. The way a platform operates in Nigeria is very different than the way it operates in Switzerland, right? I mean, this is just the reality. So you're absolutely right that we have a strong we have a big responsibility ahead of us to make sure that the instrument is actually responsive for different regions and different country contexts. And certainly it shouldn't be driven by one nation's or one region's own laws.
Thank you very much, Eva. I don't want to monopolize this discussion fully, so I would like to open the floor to any questions. First of all, to the other panelists, whether you have a question to Eva or to any other from the audience. Please raise your hand if you have a question to ask or an idea that comes to your mind. And don't be shy. Maybe then one further question I have to you, Eva, which is if you compare the European discussions and the ILO discussions, the EU directive actually has three main pillars. It is the employment status question, presumption of employment. It is a question of algorithms and a question of transparency. And everything surrounds these three elements plus the definitions. The ILO took a different approach because they are going into defining labor standards for platform work in the convention recommendation, in the recommendation even to much greater detail. How do you compare and assess these two different approaches, and which approach would you prefer?
I think I would prefer neither of them, but that ship has sailed, most certainly. Look, I think that's a fair description, Michael. I think what is helpful in the ILO context is that we already have past instruments when it comes to classification of workers, in particular Recommendation 198 on the employment relationship. So we already have a strong ILO foundation from the past on that. And so there's really no need for this forthcoming labor standard to go into those details. Now, of course, there is big appetite to discuss technology and algorithms. And I think that is true. I mean, of course, based on what you just mentioned on the EU directive, as well as in the context of the ILO standard, and also to have provisions pertaining to transparency. So I would say that the political appetite for those topics remain true both at the European and at the global level. Of course, the way we tackle them at the global level by default has to be a little bit different because labor relations in Europe or in most parts of Europe works differently than the rest of the world, right? So labor relations and sort of relationships with unions at large, has a completely different history in several European countries that, cannot be copy pasted into a global standard. But there is certainly an appetite to at least touch on those issues because some member states feel that that the use of technology in the world of work is relatively new. And regardless of whether we agree or not, I think ultimately at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to create a labor standard that can stand the test of time, regardless of how the platform economy develops over the next decade or decades.
Thank you very much, Eva. Let me turn on to our other speakers on the panel here. Mohamed, you have been following platform work at the WEC level as well and have been at the ILC. And of course, you come from Egypt. You are one of the emerging markets for our industry in the Middle East MEA region. How do you assess the ILC outcomes from an HR services point of view? So looking at agency work, looking at level playing field between our industry and platforms, and how do you see things moving forward?
From the perspective of Egypt and Middle East, ILC 2025 is really marks special moments for the employment services industry. At this year, we are see real life of employment agency, employers and workers in same room. Week one is two tensions between the three parties, and then under leadership of Eva that is working really around 20 hours a day. I saw Eva every day, 8 o'clock morning, and then she stay till 12 o'clock night. She is working to lead the employer party. the formal recognition of platform workers within the context of this work collective representative and digital protection is achievement. We welcomed that commitment from the three parties, the employers and workers, and also government, to regulate in ways that reflect a new labor market. Inside Egypt, we are now have around 300,000 daily workers is working in the platforms through a lot of platform agencies, and also is like Uber, like Kareem, and they increasing 20% every year. So the platform issue is big case inside Egypt and Dubai. So we are aiming to make regulation that can be useful for the three parties.
Thank you very much. This is very insightful and very helpful. And it's good to hear from outside of Europe, because I feel that the discussion is, again, very much Eurocentric in many discussions at global and European level. I would like to say a few words about our assessment. Of course, we have been very closely working together with the IOE and with EVA on discussing platform work at the global level. We have been in the task force. We have been trying to shape the position. And we initially were very much aligned that it is better to have a recommendation first, because platform work is still a very much evolving topic. And we don't want to have a review clause on the standard. We don't want the standard to be revised every 5 to 7 years, but it would have been good to provide first some guidance and then enter into binding standards. However, there are some elements which are really key to us, and some of them haven't been touched yet. Definitions were key, and there I think we have reached an overall balanced outcome. On the instrument, yeah, there was a vote in the end, which is atypical for the ILC. Normally it's consensus, but here it was a vote, and it shows just how controversial this topic is. And one topic that will be on the agenda for next year is the employment status and the classification question, which is important to us, but again, it needs to recognize the role of both self-employed and workers in the platform economy. So indeed, I wouldn't say glass half full, half empty, because we are still in the process of looking at this instrument, but certainly an important discussion at global level, at European level, and for business community at large. And therefore, I'm very happy to have one of the big European delivery platforms with us today. Olya, what is the most important issue from your perspective as a platform provider, and what is your expected business impact moving forward if this regulation comes into place?
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Welcome to all. Very briefly on Bolt, so we are indeed a European platform, mainly active in the ride-hailing and food delivery businesses. We were founded in Estonia, but we now have expanded to more than 50 countries around the world. So if we talk indeed about ride-hailing, for example, what do we do here is we intermediate between clients, which are passengers and drivers, and basically both somehow are clients. So we are here to balance the offer and the demand, and to interact both sides on the platforms. Now, because we are an intermediary, that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility, and we shouldn't care and basically bear some kind of course of responsibility. So the question, I think, is not so much about should platform work be regulated, but how is it regulated? Does it need to be more regulated. I mean, first you can consider that the existing laws already capture platform work as part of a general labor regulation. And there are many countries where basically the labor law already functions well. And if I take again the case of a driver, let's say a ride-hailing driver, if that driver wants to claim for reclassification, for example, as an employee, can go to labor laws, labor courts, and claim for such reclassification. So you already have basically a legal framework which already allows this. You may think also when self-employed people are their own boss, you know, and have a legal entity, that it's already captured by EU regulations, for example, such as platform to business, which will also cover the relationship between the platform and the business. Michael, you mentioned also the algorithmic part. There are regulations such as GDPR, for example, the EAI Act, and so on, which also extensively already deal with those topics, meaning that additional regulations somehow are kind of sometimes redundant and even can bring a bit of unclarity on all that. So that's the first part. And then let's say that if you are considering additional regulations, the risk here is, again, that it might be redundant, it might be not well designed, and even harmful. The fact is that what the few initiatives we have seen at the stage, and of course everybody has in mind the platform work directive at European level, sometimes are a bit too driven by political objectives and don't really take the reality on the ground. If you take ride hailing, and here maybe I will speak, sorry, with a Eurocentric view, though Bolt, of course, evolves elsewhere. But I mean, the vast majority of the drivers or the unions, when you talk to them, and I take part to negotiations, I'll come back to that later, most of them don't really want to be employed by the platforms. I think they're mostly, proud of being their own boss, of choosing with whom they want to work, when they want to work, and so on. But when you look at some of those legislative initiatives, there was a high risk that it would have led to automatic reclassification as employees against the will of those who would have been directly impacted. Now, as I was saying, that doesn't mean platforms shouldn't have some kind of responsibility on top of the existing law. I will just very briefly mention some initiatives which are interesting. I'm not saying that's the silver bullet and it fits one size fits all, as we discussed before. But in France, for example, the government has put in place a mandatory collective bargaining framework, or with platforms on one hand and platform workers unions on the other. And together, we have already reached agreements on revenues, for example, on deactivation rules. So it can work. Sometimes it doesn't work. It's a bit complicated, but I think that's one option. And then you also have some kind of self-regulation initiatives. For example, we at Bolt are working on code of conducts as we speak in Malta, together with fleets, which are sometimes entities which gather, drivers or couriers, to make sure that the fleets guarantee the benefits that the platform workers are entitled to, that they get the right treatment that they deserve. So I'd say it's a balance of two, but the bigger risk indeed is over-regulation, and if not, bad regulation. So definitely in the ILO case, again, I think that based on the experience of Platform Work Directive, we really hope it won't end to that situation.
Thank you very much. I will derogate from my script and I will ask Eva a question, because I have seen these discussions at European level on collective bargaining for self-employed and whether there is a room to regulate platform work via other means than laws. And I know, Eva, you have been engaged in platform work business before joining the US employers. What is your view on this kind of European way of using collective bargaining in platform work?
Thank you, Michael. Well, I think Aurélien put it very well that, in certain countries, in certain contexts, that may work well, but it can't be the silver bullet globally. And the reason for that is, of course, that there is a fundamental reason why we have this distinction between those who are employees and those who are self-employed, right? If we were to extend all these rights to those who are self-employed, we would in essence dismantle the independent contractor category and in some cases create cartels, or it would be anti-competitive in certain jurisdictions. So it certainly isn't the, the go-to solution that would work in every jurisdiction. There's also something to be said about, whatever we agree upon in this particular labor standard will then also create a slippery slope for labor relations more broadly, right? And so if collective bargaining were to be granted for independent contractors in this scenario, then ultimately would have to be granted everywhere, which for all the reasons that I just laid out isn't really a feasible solution. So I think it's great when in national contexts solutions are found that make sense in that national context and whatever their local economy is facing, bearing in mind, historical contexts, current laws, and just the wish of those constituents. But yeah, unfortunately, at the global level, it wouldn't be a good idea for the business community.
Thank you very much. Back to Mohammed. Of course, you are leading Target HR Manpower Group Egypt, and I would be interested to hear from you a bit more on the business impact of platform work on your company, on the HR service industry in Egypt, and how do you see this balance between platform work as a new service provider, the risk of competition, but also the interlinks between our industry and platform work. So how do you see this overall interrelation? And back to the question, how to regulate or not to regulate? Over to you, Mohammed.
Yes, at last May, there is a new Egyptian labor law already issued. And already it is now regulated through the new labor law to be protected. The platform workers will be affected from August 2025, and there is now internal meeting between the platform companies that is working inside Egypt for the cost pressure, because it is not only employment contract. It means employment contract. It means social insurance. It meaning some taxes. So it means a cost, and the cost will be high. So the challenge will be the pressure of cost for the platform industry and the local staffing industry also. The also worker misclassifications. There is some workers already is working morning in companies, and he spend only 3 hours through the platform application. So still the illegal classification of the platform employees is not clear, because there is some employees is working only 3 hours. There is employees is working only 2 days weekly. So when we will define that the platform employee can be protected through the staffing agency or through the platform company. This is not clear yet, and Egyptian Labor Ministry is too clear that 2025 all the platform workers must be protected. So still there is a struggling of how we will regulate the employees.
Thank you very much. I would like to turn back to the audience, and I will not ask for questions, but I will take the liberty to put some of our colleagues and members a bit on the spot. We've just recently been to South Africa, and we've been discussing trends in the world of work there with our global members. And I see Jackie and Beth being on the call. And I would be happy to hear from South Africa. How does this resonate, what you heard today, in your country, in your region, and what do you see as main challenges for platform work in South Africa? One of you, Jackie or Bev.
I'm going to defer to Bev because I know she's closer to this than I am. So, and the input would be current and up to date. Thank you. Thanks, Bev.
Thank you for that. And Eva, first of all, can we say thank you? I think you had one of my colleagues, Yanni, who was working very closely with you. So there was in such admiration of the work that has actually been done. I think the key discussion that Michael, that we've been discussing post ILC 2025 is really where to from here and what the outcomes of next year might be. Because I think so critically to us, and listening to you, the same message that we have all resonated with, and that is the very limited progress that was made in year one. And I think the comment has been made by the colleagues as well, is that better no regulation than bad regulation. And I think given the fact that we've got a convention and a recommendation, which was not the ideal position, we really have been considering that if it does not get concluded next year, what does it really mean to us and how it might look? Because at the end of the day, Michael, as you know, we have a complex situation in South Africa, as many other countries, and you've raised it as well. One size does not fit all, and better perhaps for us that these discussions happen at a national basis rather than an international basis. So I think it's very early days. The team came back, they're exhausted. But we really started to look at, we're going to have to prepare because we're going to discuss on our national level. And I think we have fairly good engagements as a country. But we really need to consider what might be the best outcome for us. But I really want to put that back to Eva and actually say that's the kind of the position we're taking right now, that maybe if the convention does not get concluded, and I've worked at ILC for many, many years, and we've never faced that situation. But what is your view of that, being the stage that if we can't move forward on it, that best and we won't go into a third year of standard setting because that is not the ILC mandate. Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Bev. And I do really appreciate this point that no regulation is better than bad regulation. I may need to get a tattoo of that at some point. But you're right that, you know, it does pose a question of what happens in year two, right? And look, I mean, there was that consensus from member states of wanting to have a principle-based approach. So we do have a foundation to sort of streamline the draft instrument and see if we can get it across the finish line. Now, having that said, it's clear that this is a topic that has had a high level of controversy and a high level of disagreement, not just during this ILC, but in previous years as well, right? As many of you know, the ILO convened a tripartite expert meeting on this topic back in 2022, and usually those expert meetings reach consensus. I'm not going to say very easily, but they reach consensus after a week of negotiating. And that one didn't reach consensus. And then later on, when the ILO governing body were deciding on whether or not to move forward with the standard setting, that decision was also taken by vote, which is also not extremely common. So we see this trajectory, right, that this topic is controversial and is, you know, has some sensitivities. There is, you know, it has happened that a standard does not pass adoption in the second year. It happened during the negotiations of the Contract Labor Convention, which I believe was late 90s. So it has happened, right? Because as you all know, in order for a labor standard to be adopted, you need 2/3 majority vote. And for context, the number of votes in favor of a convention during this year's standard setting process was less than 2/3. Now, obviously, that vote is not the same thing, right? Voting for the form of the instrument is not the same as voting for the adoption. But it indicates, right, that there is some hesitancy on this issue. I mean, we will continue working in good faith to get a good outcome that we can all stand behind. But you are right that there are some challenges, and I think one of the tricky parts in the ILO world is that these processes tend to not really fully go away. So even if there is no, let's say, even if a convention doesn't get adopted, there is still precedent that it sort of goes back to the machinery for a future process, which is exactly what happened with the contract labor convention, because it went then back to the machinery and it came out as the employment relationship recommendation a couple of years later. So, the chances of the process completely going away, I would say, are pretty slim. So I think our best bet as the global business community is to work for a streamlined principle-based instrument that we can all live with. But we will see what the next year brings.
Aurelia, I would like to get back to you because we got some questions before this meeting in the forms to sign up, and Beatrice will add a few questions that have been posed and addressed to you. Beatrice, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. So indeed, we have received one question that I think you would be better placed to answer. And it can be provocative, but at the same time, it's a fair question because it reads, given the Platform Work Directive and the results of the most court rulings on platform workers' employment status, wouldn't it make more sense for platforms to anticipate the regulations and provide workers with proper contracts? So to actually say, well, we are actually doing something right at the moment already. So why over-regulating? And so to link it to this question is, what is Bolt doing at the moment? Do you have any best practice on contracts with the workers in the gig economy? Are you doing any projects? How is Bolt as a corporate dealing with the Platform Work Directive?
Thank you. No, it's a good question indeed, but I think it's also it's an opportunity for me to stress that first. Look, after having been a few years in this industry, just to restate first that most platform workers that we see, at least in Europe, but I think my colleagues at Bolt who also work in other regions of the world, do not necessarily have as objective in life to be the employee of Bolt or Uber or else. Their main objective is to be self-employed, to enjoy the benefits it brings in terms of freedom, but also to earn decently their life, which is absolutely a fair and normal objective. It's true that the media have put the spotlight in the past years on a few court decisions. Now, if you look at the situation today, the court decisions are very diverse, meaning that you will see some court decision in one way, which will say that the platforms should be the employers, and other decisions, and sometimes a lot, which actually say the other way around. And especially the decisions which are on recent cases. Why? Because you are mentioning contracts, and actually we do not have contracts with the platform workers. We have terms and conditions because the platform workers are not our employees. As I was mentioning before, we are here to intermediate between an offer and demand, and the platform workers join the platform to basically try to have some clients. And in the last years, indeed, based on those court decisions, based on the evolution of the regulation, I think the various platforms have adopted their term conditions, are a bit more cautious in that way, but also in a very positive way on the matter. So we do not intend to change that, but I think jointly, all together, the industry here is trying to raise the standards. Going briefly back to the Platform Work Directive, I want to underline also, because I think it's also a good example for the ILO convention, that there was not necessarily a very good start, and that at some point we all feared that we were going to end up with a text which could have led to automatic reclassification of platform workers, especially of drivers, because again, I think those who were drafting it were not maybe taking into account the reality of the sector. For example, a platform, as I said, has to bear some responsibility. We need to check the safety of the passenger and so on. And it's true that sometimes we need to have to do some controls. And because of that, suddenly we would have triggered criteria, which would have triggered a presumption of employment, and we would have become the employer, which is wrong. But hopefully we ended up with a text, I think we can say, is much more balanced. Now the risk indeed is in the next, now there's a bit more, 1.5 years left for the transposition, that there is over transposition, or that what was avoided in the Platform Work Directive legislative process will be found again in the transposition. So that's the main risk. And I would also very humbly encourage those who take part to the process on the ILO convention to try to avoid those traps. And again, really take into account the reality of what both platform workers want and the specificities of each of these industries. So, I mean, it's a convention, it can't deal with every sector of the economy, but still it's a bit important that it's not completely disconnected from the reality of the business life.
Thank you very much. I would like to get back to our audience, and I'm seeing there on top of my screen Mathilde Bonichon from France, and I know for a fact that France has been discussing platform work quite intensely, and also quite intensely from the HR services and HR perspective. So Mathilde, if I may, I would like to ask you on your views on what's happening on platform work at global level, ILO, in Europe, but also in France, being a big market for our industry. And I know you are passionate about the topic. So Mathilde, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me this floor. Actually, the legal context of the platform in France, it's quite paradoxal in terms of the next directive that should be transposed end of 26. And because in France, we have the presumption of independent and not workers. So that means that France should change the law next year. That's the first thing. Our federation have many litigation against platform which have the similar activity as agency work companies. They're acting exactly the same as our members that are digital agencies. So the difference, it's the way it's term and condition, as you mentioned, Aurélien, with the independent people, but in the reality, they were workers. That's why we had this litigation to recognize the fact that they were in the condition of workers, and that's the reason why 3 times the labor courts give us the right interpretation of the law that workers or independent cannot choose the contract or the status in the contract with the platform. It's the reality. If the worker is under subordination of the employer, it's a worker. So that's the reason why, for the moment, we have this litigation in France, because the presumption we have with independent people, it's not a good way to for our industry to fight false platforms that are in fact agency work. Thank you
very much, Mathilde. And indeed, the situation is complex in France, and there are quite some challenges. And a lot of litigation as well happening. Litigation also being started by our member in France, Prisma Emploi. So all the best in shaping these discussions in France. Back to my panel and my panelists. Any comments or any final remarks from your side on what you've heard in the discussion so far and in the conversation? If I want to start some closing remarks from your side.
Sure, happy to. I mean, certainly, we just heard the mention of litigation or the mention earlier on specific news cases. It's sort of very easy to be bogged down in individual cases, right? But what we have ahead of us at the ILO is really, the need to create a standard that is workable for different regions, for different national contexts. And so we've been obviously preparing for a while, but also welcome the views of all of those who are on this call in the continued preparation for the next year through the various employer federations at the national level. And so our hope is, of course, to preserve business freedom, preserve different business models that are clearly thriving and clearly providing great opportunities for workers around the world. And really making sure that we all live in economies where also workers have the freedom to choose whatever is best for them, which may change over their lifetimes, right? But really giving them that freedom and making sure that our labor markets are responsive. So, well, fingers crossed to all of us, and would welcome, of course, the continued engagement of those on today's call.
Thank you much, Eva. Aurélien, maybe some closing remarks from your side. Europe, global, national, where do you see regulation moving and where do you see the opportunities for your sector and for our sector moving forward?
Well, I think altogether the platform industry has to build a sustainable business, which is a win-win for all, and in first place, indeed, platform workers. So again, platforms definitely, have to bear some responsibilities, being conscious of it. And I think as we go, we at Bolt are about to sign partnerships with major institutions in this field. Now, that doesn't mean that we should transform platform workers against their will again for most of them as employees. And I would underline that these industries also exist or can work in that context, and that the few attempts which have been different have actually failed, which proves that the business case is also not really here. So I would really hope that again in the ILO process this is kept in mind, and that we end up with a balanced text for the best of all the different stakeholders.
That's very good. And Mohamed, I have one question for you, because we have been working together, WEC and Egypt, our industry in Egypt, on promoting upward regulation for platform work, but also for our industry. We have done some webinars and seminars in Egypt recently on Convention 181, which is the Convention on Public Services. And of course, there has been discussions on the interrelation between agency work and platform work. So how do you see these two services interacting? How do you see this moving forward? And what role do you see for the ILO in setting standards for our industry?
I see it must be regulated, yes, but it must be through the meaning of business. So it is not like a clear convention with without life work of daily works of the platform, because there is a lot of companies will leave the industries in some countries in case the cost is too high, or the business will shift to be is not legal. So it must be flexible, it must be reasonable.
Thank you very much. I will not try to sum up all our discussions in the remaining 5 minutes. I just want to highlight a few points which I think are very important. First of all, regulation on platform work needs to be appropriate and fit for purpose. It needs to be adaptable, but also not too flexible. So we need to have the right level of regulation. And we need to make sure that regulation meets the evolving status of platform work. That doesn't mean the convention being revised every 5 years, but it means actually we would have been better off with accommodation at this stage. Now that ship has sailed, but let's make sure that we are aware of the fact that platform is rapidly changing. We will have next year a big topic I would even say a big battle to fight on the employment status. That will be, I think, one of the main controversial topics of the next year. Legal presumption in Europe, but what do we do at global level? And of course, there are many other provisions which we haven't touched on, which will be on the discussion next year. Whether we get to an agreement after a year or two or not, if I mentioned it, we are very early in the process in the looking at the provisions, but I hope that we will get to a good outcome next year. We also know the platform work is being used by a lot of young people and a lot of young workers seeing this one as a chance to get experience, get some extra income, and get familiar with work. So I think we should use this opportunity and use this potential and not regulate platform work to death. We should rather embrace these new forms of providing services. That actually links us back to a next event which we are having in September. So in Europe, summer break is coming soon. But we are doing an event in September on the intergenerational workplace, which is a conversation on our social impact report. The social impact report is a publication we do every year with a different topic. And this really looks at how the workplace is changing with different generations working at the same place and at the same time. And we're looking at how we serve these different groups on labor markets. We've looked at data and facts and figures from our members, from stakeholders, and we have Stefano Scarpetta from the OECD being one of our keynote speakers. So I would like to pencil this date in our diary, in your diary. We hope to see you again, and I would like to thank our speakers today. I would thank our audience, and I hope you all have a good day and see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.